good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I hope you're all doing well. It's just gone 1 p.m. here in the UK, and happy bank holiday to all of those that have bank holidays. If you don't have bank holidays in your country, don't even ask me why they call them bank holidays here, but basically, a lot of people get the day off work. It's kind of like a little bit of a holiday, I guess you would say. We have a few bank holidays every year, and Easter Monday is a bank holiday. So there you go. Lots of people got a long weekend because Good Friday is also considered a bank holiday. So 4-day weekend for those that are in that kind of job where you don't have to work on bank holidays. Anyhow, we're here to talk about Delphi. My voice is a little bit better, not entirely better. I still feel a bit rubbish, but my voice is a little bit better, so I think I can handle a live stream. I meant to do this over a week ago now. I've had this thumbnail done for quite a while. And I've talked about Rick Allen's confession a lot, you know, the confession that sunk him. And I've also talked about the confession that Ron Logan made, that we heard about in detail when the motion to correct errors came out. And this was a previously unknown person who had been communicating with law enforcement. This was Reese Davis, who was an inmate at Newcastle Department of Corrections at the same time that Ron Logan was in 2017. So I don't think I've done kind of a direct comparison between the two confessions. So that's what we're going to do. And I'm not going to stay on too long so that I don't end up losing my voice. But I've been watching the chat before I went live, and there's discussion here about Ron Logan's height, or the height of Bridge Guy. So let's just address that first. So we got Mike here saying, why bother doing this when BG certainly wasn't Ron Logan? Okay, here's the thing. Up until the Reese Davis letters became known, and the fact that Ron Logan confessed to Reese Davis became known, I've never believed that Bridge Guy was Ron Logan. Never believed that Bridge Guy was Ron Logan. I thought Bridge Guy was younger looking than Ron Logan. I don't really know why I thought that, because you can't see Bridge Guy's face. Like, you see like a little outline, but I don't know. And I'm still not entirely convinced that Ron Logan is the killer. I'm really not. However, I think there's more to be said for Ron Logan's confession. There's more evidence to support Ron Logan being the killer than Rick Allen being the killer. I think that's where I'm at. Thank you, Kimberly, for gifting 5 memberships. That's very kind of you. Thank you so much. We've got True Crime Snoopy, Cornish Gypsy, True Crime Addicted, AG4981, and Mailer's Mum. So welcome. I know some of you have been members before, so welcome back. And if you've never been a member before, go and check out the members area. There was a new little video put on the members area yesterday, a little update for those who followed last year when Clem had pups. So we got a couple of puppies running around who are now nearly 11 months old. So go and check that out. But thank you, Kimberly. You are so kind. Now, the thing about the height, and look, here's the thing. In the early days of the case, now this is a poster that's definitely pre-2019. And I know that because they've not got the young guy sketch on this poster. They've only got the old guy sketch on this poster. And if you remember, if you've been following the case for this long, you will know that in April of 2019, they did a press conference. It's become known as the change of direction press conference because law enforcement said, we're changing direction. We're now considering this sketch, the old guy sketch, secondary to the young guy sketch. The young guy sketch being the one that Doug Carter at the time said was the guy, said that this was the guy. And then he walked it back a little bit and said, well, when we find the actual killer, he'll look somewhere between the young guy sketch and the old guy sketch because sketches are not photographs. And if you've been following the case for as long as I have, you'll remember all of that. You'll remember it. And look, in my opinion, Rick Allen does not look like an amalgamation of the young guy sketch and the old guy sketch. We don't know what the jury would have thought about either sketch because they weren't allowed at the trial. That was one of the things that Nick McClelland made sure got banned because it would have been too confusing to the jury to have, Doug Carter saying, because if they allowed the sketch, they'd have also been allowed to question Betsy Blair on who she actually saw on the bridge around 2 p.m, just before 2, on February 13th, 2017. Because the young guy sketch was Betsy Blair's sketch that she did just a few days after the murders. She sat down with a sketch artist just a few days after the murders. But they didn't put it out. They didn't put that sketch out until 2019. They favoured the old guy sketch because this old guy sketch was an amalgamation of what they thought Bridge Guy looked like. So it was an artist's impression of BG, plus some information from Sarah Carbo. And you'll know Sarah Carbo, she's the one who completely lied. She's the one who said that she was driving east on County Road North, past the Hoosier Harvey Store camera at 3:57, and saw a man walking up the road, so walking west, so walking in the opposite direction to her. And she got a good look at him. She got a good look at him as she drove by at 30 miles per hour. That makes sense. How you can get a good look at anybody as you're driving by at 30 miles per hour. She'd have seen him for a split second. And she said that he was a muddy and bloody man. She said there was so much blood on him, it looked like he'd slaughtered a pig. And yet this guy is walking down the road as bold as brass in the daylight at 3:57. And no one else saw him. So she's a liar. She's a liar. Prove me wrong, Sarah Carbo. Come and sue me, Sarah Carbo. You lied. You lied. Anyhow, Betsy Blair said that hers, 3 feet from her car. I know. But Betsy Blair, who I think was a good witness, I think she tried hard to be factual and give as much detail as she could. And she said that the young guy sketch, that she sat down with a sketch artist just days after the murders while this young man was fresh in her mind. And she said it was 10 out of 10. The likeness to the man she saw on the first platform of Monan High Bridge on February 13th, 2017, just before 2 p.m, it was 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10. She said he was a young man in his 20s with dark, poofy hair. Now, as far as I know, that man has never been found. Who was that man? He could be completely innocent. But Anyhow, this is pre-2019, and it gives the height of Bridge Guy. And this is from the FBI. This is the FBI's analysis, like height analysis. And they said BG was between 5'6" and 5'10", and weighed between 180 and 220 pounds, with reddish brown hair. Now, neither Rick Allen nor Ron Logan had reddish brown hair in 2017. Ron Logan's hair was very grey, and Rick was going grey. These are trial exhibits. Just let me show you one of these. These were trial exhibits of what Rick looked like. So, like, going grey. So not reddish brown. These were taken from Rick's phone and produced as trial exhibits. Another one. So the FBI's analysis between 5'6" and 5'10". The problem I have with the height analysis is that you don't know whether BG is standing upright. Like, he's looking down, isn't he? And because the BG that we've seen, I know we've seen the full 43-second video now, but the BG that we've seen close up is dreadfully zoomed in. So you can't tell whether Bridge Guy is standing upright. And for whatever reason, the FBI then removed the height analysis. And I know that people have tried to do height analysis. I know people have used AI to help them do height analysis, but I'm not confident that it's even possible to do a credible height analysis. I mean, 5'6" to 5'10" is pretty, is pretty wide, really. I think they said 5'8", but with, plus or minus 2 inches. So neither of those would be suitable for Rick Allen, who's only 5'4", and Ron Logan, who is alleged to have been 6 foot. So I'm not going to go from the height. I'm not convinced that BG's height gives us a good indication of who BG was. I think if it did, they'd have used height at trial. I think if they could have been confident that, and I know they said at the trial that they didn't do height analysis because it was too expensive. That's absolute nonsense. I think they realised that they weren't going to get a reliable height analysis, so didn't even bother. And it may have been likely that it would have confused the jury because it would have excluded Rick Allen. Okay, so I don't use height. The reason why I don't use height is because I've never seen a reliable height analysis, even from the FBI. And there's a reason why the FBI took that height analysis off their materials. Now, the weight, 180 to 220 pounds, that would be fitting of both Rick Allen and Ron Logan. They're around that, I would imagine. I don't exactly know how heavy either Rick or Ron were in 2017, but, they're stocky, shall we say. Slightly overweight, shall we say. But Logan's feet are 10 times bigger than Bridge Guy's itty bitty feet. Again, the Bridge Guy that we know he's so zoomed in that it's impossible. It's impossible to give more than, body type. That's all we can say from Bridge Guy. Is a body type. And BG is looking down. So if BG, stood straight like you do when your height's measured, maybe you would have been taller. Let's say taller than the highest measure that the FBI gave. So FBI said between 5'6" and 5'10". So if BG stood straight, maybe he'd be 5'11", maybe he'd even be 6 foot. We don't know. And because I don't know, I don't use height. Okay. Daughter of Scotland, member for 44 months. My oldest member. Daughter of Scotland, you are the OG of OGs. You're an Uber OG. If there's even such a thing. All right, we're going to talk about confessions, though. I'm going to talk about confessions. Bridge Guy could be a red herring. It may not even be the killer. Exactly. How do we know? And law enforcement themselves. I know that at the trial, it was all about BG and Nick McClellan saying, if we can ID Big G, we know who the killer is. That's not what law enforcement said. All the ways up to the arrest of Rick Allen. They always said they didn't know whether BG was, the BG that we see is the voice that we hear. They've always said that. They didn't know whether the guy walking on the bridge was the same guy who said, guys down the hill. We don't know. And that's a problem. Yeah, Pope Francis has died, yeah. Rest in peace to Pope Francis. I did see that news this morning. You have the intense cold burgerster being accused of wanting to unalive folk just by looking at them. Oh dear. Oh dear. Yeah, I believe that as well, Emma. I've said that a lot. The first thing you'd notice about Rick Allen is his height. You would say, if you saw Rick Allen, you would say he was really short for a guy. And none of the witnesses saw a really short guy. One of the witnesses, one of the young girls that saw what they say is Rick Allen, said he was taller than her. And she was 5'7". So taller than 5'7". And the reason why no one saw a really short guy was because Rick Allen had left the trails by the time Abby and Libby got there. And nobody saw Ron Logan because Ron Logan could have just come down from his hill, from his property. Let's just do, before we get into the confessions, let's just do a quick reminder. So the girls were found on Ron Logan's property. So Ron Logan's house is up here. This is all Ron Logan's property. I don't know where the property line is exactly, but that is Ron Logan's land there. I don't know how far it extends, but there's the cemetery. That's Ron Logan's field, where he keeps horses and stuff. And then this area is Ron Logan's land. So the girls were found on his land. Now, to me, that's not something that I would hold against Ron Logan, honestly. Because, if I woke up this morning and I found a murdered person in my backyard, it doesn't mean to say I'm the murderer, does it? It just means that someone's dumped a body. in my backyard. So that in itself, that the girls were found on Ron Logan's land, I don't hold that against Ron Logan. I need more than just, oh, well, they were found on his land. I need more than that. But this is the approximate area of the crime scene here. There was some of Libby's clothes found in the creek around here, like in the bushes, like the edge of the creek. So that's the approximate area of the crime scene. I always put the pin on the coordinates given in the Ron Logan search warrant. But the crime scene did extend for quite a ways. Okay. And then they were on the south side of the bridge. That's where Libby was when she took the BG video. That's the south side of the bridge. There's the private drive that the stay at the trial said the van drove under the bridge, because this driveway here goes under the bridge, goes under the south side of the bridge, and that's what scared Rick Allen over to the other side. And then this is the Webber property here. So Brad Webber, whose van it was that allegedly scared Rick Allen, was coming home. The state said between 2:27 and 2:30, they said at trial. We know now that can't possibly be the case. So we know the van is out. So that's the lie of the land. All right, so let's now go to this confession here. So this is the confession that sunk him. This was the only confession that had any amount of detail in it. You know, there were confessions that Rick Allen made that did have some detail, you know, like I murdered my entire family, even my grandchildren, even though Rick didn't have grandchildren. He started World War III. Those kind of confessions. He cheated on his cigarette was another confession that he made while he was psychotic. But this confession is the one that sunk him. And this was to his psychologist, Dr. Monica Waller, on May 3rd, 2023. And this is what he said. Now, we do know that there's some truth in this. We do know that there's some truth in this, because he did, from his own mouth, say that he went to visit his parents in Mexico, Indiana, in the morning. And then he went home, got a jacket, and then went straight out to the trails because it was a nice day. And he spent about an hour or so at the trails, and then he left. He told, I think this was in the interview with, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this one was with Steve Mullin and Tony Liggett, where he said he didn't stay long because he wanted to watch his stocks. Like, he follows the, stocks and shares and things, and it's not easy to do on his phone. So he wanted to go home to watch his stocks on his computer. So he only stayed for about an hour. So he walked from where he parked, and he didn't park, according to Rick himself, didn't park at the old CPS building. He didn't really remember where he parked, but he couldn't say that he parked at the old CPS building. And then he walked, so it would be like from the Freedom Bridge area down the trail to the High Bridge. And again, I'm going to have to get the map up. This was Rick's approximate route. So this is the old CPS building. We'll put this on 2017 so we actually see the CPS building. 2017, okay. So this is where the old CPS building is here. So it's just an abandoned building. It's been knocked down now. But that's where law enforcement needed Rick to say that he parked, even though no one saw Black Ford Focus. No one saw Black Ford Focus park there. It's weird. One person said that they saw a purple PT Cruiser, a smart car, And Betsy Blair said she saw what looked like a 1965 Mercury comet. So none of them saw black focus. So no one saw a small guy and no one saw a black focus. Weird. There's another parking area where he possibly could have parked, which would be here. But anyway, this is the Freedom Bridge. So he would have walked, wherever he parked, he would have come from this area, walked down here, along here, to the bridge, went out onto the first platform because he likes fishing. So he always goes to see, if he goes to the trails, he goes to see if he can see any fish in the creek. And yes, there are fish in that creek. So for those who say it's too cloudy to see fish, well, people have taken photographs of fish in this creek, so I don't know what to tell you. And then he went back. So went back the way he came. That's what he says. So he was gone by 1:30, approximately. Doesn't know exactly, but gone by 1:30. It's interesting that geofencing was also disallowed from the trial, because maybe if they geofence the entire area for the day, maybe you'd have seen Rick Allen's phone enter the geofence at a certain time and exit the geofence at a certain time. But we'll never know because the geofencing was not allowed at the trial. Interesting. Okay. All right. So I went to his mother's in the morning, went to the trails, stayed for about an hour, and then went. But this was the confession. He said, declined the invitation to go to his family lunch. Instead, drank 3 beers, followed the girls to the bridge, told her I messed with the gun. I guess that's when the bullet fell out. And that's when I ordered the girls down the hill. Now, remember, the down the hill happened on the south side of the bridge. So how come then the bullet, the magic bullet, was found on the north side, 6 inches from Libby's leg? If he messed with the gun and the bullet fell out when he ordered the girls down the hill, how come the bullet wasn't on the south side of the bridge? So that's a problem. Then he said he saw a van or heard a man, whichever. We know it's a van now. And that's what scared him not to rape them. He then forced the girls down the hill, across the creek, slashed their throats, covered their bodies with tree branches, and walked back to his car. Okay. So we know that the magic bullet wasn't found on the south side of the bridge. It was found at the crime scene. And they had to be on the south side when he heard the van, because he said that's what scared him, to take the girls across the creek to the other side where he slashed their throats. So the van, the timing of the van is important, isn't it? The timing of the van is very important. And what we heard in the motion to correct errors, hold on, let me get to it. The van, motion to correct errors, the van. You see, what we didn't learn at the trial, what the jury were never told, is that there's a video of the van passing by. The van passing by on its a problematic time. Because the van passed by at 2:44. So this is a security camera at the Sandifer's house. And I'll show you where that is in a minute, for those who don't remember this. The security camera had a wide-angle lens that captured video of traffic on West 252 North and County Road North 625 West. These are really complicated road names. And the beginning of the private drive to the Webber property, which begins as a continuation of North 625 West, approximately 190 feet north of that road's intersection with West 252 North. Okay. According to the time and date stamps on the security camera recording, a white vehicle going north on North 625 West enters the frame at approximately 2:44 and 33 seconds PM on February 13th, 2017, and continues into the private drive to the Webber property at approximately 2:44:54. Okay. And you can view it on YouTube. However, let me just show you where that is. So, this is the Webber property. The camera was at the Sanderfors property, which is down here. And the camera is looking in this direction and it's like wide angle. So, you see the van passing by these buildings here. So it enters the frame at 2:44 and 33, and then it carries on north, and that leads you on to this, which is a private drive. So this is a county road, but this then becomes private land, and this is the private drive that goes under the bridge and to the Webber's property. Now, Nick McClelland, in his response to the motion to correct errors, said, well, we don't know whether it's the correct time on the camera, could be the wrong time. It could be, but that was sitting there in the discovery. And wouldn't you think that they would have done some attempt, at least, to clarify what the actual time of that video was? And I'm sure that if that time could have been shown to fit the time it needed to be, they would have shown that surveillance video to the jury. I'm convinced they would have done that. No, we don't know how Rick is now. Don't know how Rick is now. Could it have been a work van or could it have been rented? No, there was no other, according to the defence file in the motion to correct errors, there was no other vehicles that passed by this camera between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. on that afternoon. That's what they said in the motion to correct errors. The only van that passed by was Brad Webber's. And it all fits. I think it was the right time. It all fits because Brad Webber's phone pinged at this property at 2:50. So it's consistent with the van passing here at 2:44. So it's going to take like a couple of minutes to get to the house. So it would have passed under the bridge at 2:45, 2:46. And then the phone pings at 2:50 because Brad Webber's got home. He's interacted with his phone. It's pinged off a tower. It's all consistent. So the confession of Rick Allen saying that he heard a van, well, no, that didn't happen. The state's own theory, based on that confession, says that the van had to pass by before 2:32. Had to pass by before 2:32. Why? Because at 2:32, Libby's phone was over here and didn't move again, according to the state's own witness. The state's own witness said Libby's phone did not move after 2:32. So they had to be over the other side being murdered or already dead by 2:32. So the van passing by here at 2:44, 2:45 It's too late. It's too late. So Libby's phone data plus the information from the security camera breaks Rick Allen's confession. Absolutely breaks it. Breaks it. This is what we heard about Libby's phone at the trial. Okay, during the closing arguments, this was all clarified, but the state's witness had Chris Cecil. Chris Cecil attested to this, that this is data from Libby's health app. So I've done experiments with my own health app on iPhone 6. Go and check out all those experiments that I did with my iPhone 6. So between 1:31 and 2:08, the phone walked about 700 meters, which will take them from the Mears Farm entrance to approximately a third of the way across the bridge. That's about, it's actually a bit less, but you've also got to take into account there would have been some walking before Libby got in the car. And then this is what breaks the timeline. I wish the defense had pointed this out. They didn't. The defense could have really added some really good, reasonable doubt into this. So the defense hadn't put this together. The jury certainly didn't put this together, because between 2:08 and 2:18, the girls, well, at least Libby's phone, walked a further 414 meters. Then there was no movement between 2:18 and 2:25. So this is when the state wanted the jury to believe that Rick was on the south side trying to rape the girls. And then they got disturbed between 2:27 and 2:30 by the van passing by. So we've already seen that the van didn't pass by between 2:27 and 2:30. It passed by at 2:44, 2:45, even 2:46, depending on how fast that van was going. So the van was too late. And then, according to the confession and the state's theory, then after 2:25, Rick took them through the woods, across the creek, to the other side, where he murdered them. But all of that in 50 meters and just 68 steps. And then the phone registers 2 floors climbed, which is approximately 20 feet. None of that is consistent. None of that is consistent with the state's timeline. None of that is consistent with the state's timeline. That 414 meters, if the state's theory was correct, has to be over here. It has to be after 2:25. So where's the 2 floors climbed? Don't know, because they certainly didn't climb 20 feet going up this side of the creek, because this rise is only about 2 meters. It's about 7 feet. 6.5 feet, something. Yeah, 6.5 feet. So it wouldn't even register 1 floor climbed going up this embankment here, because it's only a shallow bank, because this is part of the floodplain here. Okay, so based on the state's own phone expert who analysed Libby's health app, the data from Libby's phone does not fit with the state's theory that is based on Rick Allen's confession. And then, post-trial, we saw from the motion to correct errors that the van went by at the wrong time. Okay, so let's now look at Ron Logan's confession, the confession that he gave to Reese Davis. So none of us were aware of this, none of us, until the motion to correct errors came out. Makes me wonder if CB radios could have been used by persons or people, possibly. But there could have been there could have been any number of phones out there. We don't know, because geofencing was not allowed at the trial. All right, so this is a motion to correct error. So defendant's exhibit 4A, as attested to by Matthew Hoffman, so he's one of the investigators on the defence team, is a redacted copy of a tip from the Orion database. So the Orion database is the FBI database that was being used to collect tips for the murders. So it's a tip that was called in to the tip line on May 15th, 2017. So just 3 months after the murders, this tip was called in. Okay. And the tip came from Reese Davis. I think actually his girlfriend did the ringing, but Reese was in Newcastle Correctional Facility where Ron Logan was. All right, because Ron Logan was out on probation at the time of the murders. Ron Logan was out on probation and he violated that probation. So he went back to prison because, you know, if you violate your terms, you've got to go and serve your sentence. So he was sent back to prison and he was sent to Newcastle Department of Corrections to serve the rest of his sentence. Interestingly, very interestingly, when Nick McClelland took over as prosecuting attorney in Carroll County, which was in December of 2017, Ron Logan was released from prison and allowed to serve the rest of his sentence at home. Can't make it up, can you? All right, so he's back in May 2017, he's back in prison to serve his sentence, right? And he is in the vicinity of Reese Davis. And Ron confessed to Reese that he committed the murders. So in that tip, which the state has always had, because it was in the Orion database, so the state could have found this at any time, he confessed at some point before May 15th, because the tip came in at May 15th. Okay. Logan confessed to Reese step by step of how he murdered Abby and Libby. He told Reese how he burned his clothes in a fire pit because he got blood on them. He said where the fire pit was located. Now, we don't know whether anybody ever went out to find that fire pit. He said he used a box cutter to stab the girls in the throat. And he struggled with one of them, Libby. Libby punched him in the nose. And he thought that because his nose, you know, you get punched in the nose, like your nose literally, like you get blood spatter, right? Have you ever been punched in the nose? I have, right? The blood goes everywhere. So he thought that he'd got his blood on the girls' clothes, which is interesting because it was Libby's clothes that were found in the creek. It's interesting that, isn't it? Okay. It's also interesting that he stated that he used a box cutter. See, this is interesting because at the trial, the medical examiner said that he believed that the girls' injuries came from a box cutter. Find that interesting, don't you? Which one is Libby? This one's Libby. This one's Libby. This one's Abby. I find that interesting. You see, the reason why the medical examiner mentioned the box cutter is because in one of Rick Allen's confessions that wasn't mentioned at trial, he said that he used a box cutter. But that was never brought up at trial because it was amongst all of the ones that couldn't possibly be true, like he murdered his entire family, including his grandchildren, and he started World War III, and he cheated on his cigarette, and you know, he was just rambling. All right, so they didn't actually use that, but the medical examiner mentioned a box cutter, but that was in October of 2024. So why would Ron Logan mention a box cutter in May of 2017? Why? Because look, it's an unlikely murder weapon, honestly. It's an unlikely murder weapon, but this is what Ron Logan told Reese Davis. So he said he killed Libby first, the older girl. So the confession went something like this: that he saw the girls walking on the bridge or on the trails, and he was walking with them. He asked them if they wanted to come back to his house to see his horses and his rabbits. Are we sure that's when the letters were wrote? This is not about the letters. This is about the tip. This is not about the letters. This is about the tip. This is what was in the tip in the Orion database. This was called in as a tip on May 15th, 2017. This was called in as a tip. We're not talking about the letters. We're talking about the Orion database tip. Okay. So he asked them if they wanted to go back to his house to see his horses and his rabbits. The younger one, which is Abby, wanted to. So they started walking towards Ron Logan's house. And then Libby changed her mind. Libby wasn't comfortable with it. Abby still wanted to go, but Libby wasn't comfortable with it. So she started to argue with him. He ended up grabbing her. She punched him in the nose, and he had a box cutter in his pocket, took out the box cutter and stabbed her in the neck with it. So it wasn't like he was intending to murder them. He just saw red and stabbed her. So now he's in a quandary. What does he do with Abby? Because he's stabbed her in the neck, he's hit an artery, and she's there bleeding out. Now, how would Ron Logan or Reese Davis know at this point in May 2017 that Libby had an artery in her neck severed? How would Ron Logan and Reese Davis know that? How would they know that? How would they know that? We know that both of the girls were stabbed in the neck, but their injuries were very different. Libby had excessive blood loss because, excuse me, an artery, the carotid artery, was severed. And we know from the crime scene that all of the blood that was around was Libby's. That there was a big, excuse me, there was a big pool of blood in one area that was Libby's. There's a blood on the tree that was Libby's. And once your carotid artery is severed, that's it, game over. You're gone very quickly. So he didn't mean to kill her. He just saw red. And we know that Ron Logan, according to his ex-girlfriend, has an explosive temper. So the fact that this little girl punched him in the nose, he saw red and just stabbed her. So now, what does he do with Abby? So he said he took Abby with him for a while. So presumably left Libby there dead. Like, he would have been panicking, not knowing what to do. So leaves Libby there dead, which is maybe why her phone didn't move after 2:32. But Abby was still alive, and he took her with him. So at what point did he bring Abby back? So did he take her home? Where did he take her? And when did she die? And it's interesting that Libby was naked, and some of her clothes were in the creek. Now, were her clothes in the creek because there was Ron Logan's blood on them? But that's the confession. That's the confession. Now, that has more detail in it that is verifiably true than Rick Allen's confession that sunk him, that sent him to prison for 130 years, even down to the murder weapon and the injuries. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. We've also got some other verifiable information. Ron Logan. You see, it's interesting that Rick Allen went to the police, rang the police on February 16th, just 2 days after the murders, well, 3 days after the murders, 2 days after the girls were found, saying that he was on the trails that day. And on February 18th, went to give a statement to Dan Dullard, right? That he was on the trails that day. You know, that was the tip. The only tip amongst thousands that were accrued over years in this case that mentioned Rick Allen was from Rick Allen himself. No one else called in Rick Allen. No one. Even though this guy just continued to live his life, go down to the pub, you know, have a few beers, work at CVS, the only pharmacy in Delphi. So, you know, sooner or later, you know, everybody needs a pharmacy sooner or later. So Rick Allen's there. Loads of people would have seen him. No one put together that Rick Allen was Bridge Guy. Why? Because Rick Allen wasn't Bridge Guy. However, several people called in about Ron Logan, including his ex-girlfriend, who said that when she saw Bridge Guy, she was convinced that that was Ron Logan. However, we have some verifiable information from the FBI about Ron Logan's whereabouts on that afternoon. Because even though Rick Allen put himself on the trails, you know, he was that guilty, he put himself there, Ron Logan lied about where he was that afternoon. He lied about where he was. He got his cousin to lie for him. He got his cousin to say that they were at the aquarium store in Lafayette that afternoon. And then the cousin, who originally lied to law enforcement, then contacted law enforcement and took back that statement and said, actually, I wasn't with him that afternoon. I didn't take him to Lafayette that afternoon. And he asked me to lie. He asked me to lie for him. So Ron Logan lied about his alibi. And we know Ron Logan was at home in the vicinity of the crime scene that afternoon. This comes from the Ron Logan search warrant that was released by the Murder Ship podcast. Well, this is an actual FBI search warrant, which was issued on March 17th, 2017, so just a month after the murders. The FBI's top suspect was Ron Logan. All right, so a call placed using Logan's cell phone produced cell tower data that shows Logan's cell phone appears to be in or around his property on February 13th, 2017 at 2:09 p.m. So he was there in the vicinity at 2:09 p.m. We know the girls were on the bridge at 2:09. We know the BG video was taken 2:13 into 2:14 from the south side of the bridge. So they would have actually been on the bridge itself at 2:09. Although his exact location cannot be confirmed, the tower data shows that Logan's cell phone was in the Delphi area, in the area of the Monon High Bridge Trail. Now, of course, Ron Logan's property, right, if he was at his house, right, which is up here, like cell tower data isn't massively exact. So he could have been in his house, in his field. It doesn't necessarily put him on the bridge at 2:09. He could have been on the bridge at 2:09. Absolutely, he could have been. Or he could have been here, he could have been here, but he was in this vicinity. He certainly wasn't in Lafayette at 2:09. He was not in Lafayette at 2:09. He was at home. All right. Now it gets even more interesting because Ron Logan knew that the girls were missing, and didn't help with the search, even though he gave permission for people to search his land. Like, you know, people went to his door and asked him if they could search on his land, and he said, yeah. But he didn't help. And he told Barbara MacDonald, you know, the reporter Barbara MacDonald, that he was too busy. He was too busy to go and search because he had to sort out his fish, deal with his fish. Because he did actually go and get some fish. He did actually go to Lafayette, just not at the time that he said he was there. And he had to sort out his fish. He had to look after his fish, so he couldn't search. However, his phone tells a different story. Phone tells a completely different story. And again, I'm reading this from the FBI search warrant. An analysis of Logan's cell phone reveals a text message sent from his phone at 7:56 p.m. on February 13th, 2017. Initial exam of this analysis reveals Logan's phone was likely outside of his residence and in the proximity of where Abby and Libby's bodies were located. So at 7:56, he was outside in the vicinity of the crime scene. So even though, you know, he didn't actually take part in the searches, his phone was in the vicinity of the crime scene at 7:56. So Lord knows what he told law enforcement, but the FBI didn't believe him because the FBI knew he lied about his alibi. Then, again, an analysis of Logan's cell phone revealed a text message sent by his phone at 10:16 p.m. on February 13th. Initial exam of this phone indicates his phone was likely outside of his residence and in the proximity of where Libby and Abby's bodies were located. So at 7:56 and 10:16 p.m, his phone is in the vicinity of the crime scene, even though he said he was inside the whole night looking after his fish. He couldn't search because he had too much to do looking after his fish. Well, how come he was in the proximity of the crime scene at 7:56 and 10:16? Now, could he have lied because he was driving? You know, he'd driven to Lafayette and he didn't want anyone to know that he'd driven to Lafayette. He wanted his cousin to lie for him because he shouldn't have been driving. Possibly, yeah. But the FBI noted that Ron Logan didn't get his cousin to lie for the morning because Ron Logan was at the trash place putting piles of like bin bags and stuff, like dumping trash. We've seen the video. The video's available. It's on YouTube. I've played it on this channel of Ron Logan at the dump that morning, like 11 something, nearly 12 o'clock. So Ron Logan was driving. He wasn't meant to be driving. It was a condition of his probation. It was a condition, and he didn't get his cousin to lie for the dump. So why did he get his cousin to lie for Lafayette? Why was it well known that he was driving about anyway? Why was it just the time of the murders that he got his cousin to lie about? Was he dumping evidence? No, because it was before the murders. That was in the morning of February 13th that he was at the dump. But the point is, he was at the dump in the morning, driving on his own, didn't ask his cousin to lie for him, but got his cousin to lie for the afternoon. But how did he know what time the girls were likely murdered? So why did he get his cousin to lie for the afternoon just for the time of the murders, or at least the abduction? Could the location of his phone with the geofence if he was at home since the girls were found on his property? Yeah, like cell tower data is not, it's not like GPS. It's not like GPS. But the point that the FBI is making here is that he lied. He lied about his alibi in the afternoon. He was definitely at home on his property at 2:09. Paper Chase, remember, for 13 months. Where was he in the afternoon? He was at home, or at least on his property. We know he was because his phone was there. This is what was said by the FBI. A call placed using Logan's cell phone produced cell tower data that shows Logan's cell phone appears to be in or around his property February 13, 2017 at 2:09 p.m. Although his exact location cannot be confirmed, the tower data shows that Logan's cell phone was in the Delphi area, in the area of the Mourne High Bridge Trail. So he was at home. Now, could have been inside his home, yeah. He could have been in his field, he could have been on his hill, or he could have been on the bridge. But he certainly wasn't in Lafayette buying fish. Did they get DNA evidence? From what? There was loads of DNA evidence at the crime scene that wasn't analysed. And then the FBI points out that at 7:56 and 10:16, Logan's phone puts him outside of his residence in the proximity of the crime scene. So make that make sense. Make that make sense. Let's also remember what came out at the trial. The defence phone expert, Melissa Eldridge, said that headphones were plugged into Libby's phone at 5:44 and then pulled out at 10:32. No, no one lived with Ron. I think you mean lived with Ron. No, he lived on his own. There was loads of DNA at the crime scene that just wasn't tested. There was also animal hair as well that wasn't tested. So 2:32, the phone stops moving. Then, so that let's take Ron Logan's confession, because we've already said that the 2:32 doesn't fit with Rick Allen's confession. Doesn't fit with Rick Allen's confession at all, because of the Apple Health app isn't consistent with what Rick said happened, and the van arrived at the wrong time. So we know that Rick Allen's confession cannot be proven by any hard evidence whatsoever. And the evidence that we do have actually refutes that confession. However, it doesn't refute Ron Logan's. I'm not saying Ron Logan's the killer. I'm just saying that the evidence we have does not rule out Ron Logan. Doesn't rule him out. So Ron Logan's confession to Reese Davis said that he killed Libby first and then he took Abby with him. So Libby's left there dead at the crime scene. Her phone is there with her probably, right? And that's why her phone doesn't move. Remember, Abby doesn't have a phone. So it's not like we can track Abby's movements via a phone. We can only track Libby's movements via a phone. And that stopped moving at 2:32. But then, according to the defense expert, headphones were plugged into Libby's phone at 5:44. Yes, Ron Logan confessed. Yes. And it wasn't taken serious. It was taken serious. The FBI had other search warrants and stuff for Ron Logan's property before the confession. And then he confessed while he was in prison to Reese Davis. So then at 7:56, Ron Logan's phone, according to the FBI, was in the proximity of the crime scene. 10:16, his phone's in the proximity of the crime scene. So we don't know what he was doing before or after. These are just, it's text messages. He's sending or receiving text messages, which will flag as a ping to the tower. So he could have been in the vicinity of the crime scene for hours. He could have been there hours. He could have been there like from, I don't know, 7 o'clock till 11 o'clock. We don't know. These are just times where the phone can be, pinned to that area. Wasn't there a shack on the property of Judge? There's little shacks and stuff all over. In your opinion, what the deal with the phone then? Read the headphone socket. Also, how do you think the mobile ended up under Abby and not destroyed? Don't know. What I can say is Abby did not put it there. the ridiculous theory put out to the jury, just to be emotional, that Abby was a hero because she hid the phone is totally ridiculous. Totally ridiculous. And then the headphones were removed from Libby's phone. Now, something that I did talk about during the trial was water damage. When this came out at the trial. Okay, when it came out of the trial. All right, so I was adding to this PowerPoint throughout the trial. So this was during Stacey Eldridge's testimony. Eldridge is asked about the phone's health data. She says she agrees with what Cecil found about the data on the steps. So the amount of steps taken, the distance travelled, Stacey Eldridge agreed with that. So the 700 meters and the 414 meters, are just in the wrong times for Rick Allen's confession to be accurate, was agreed on by both the state and the defence witnesses. She says iPhones will not log steps if you're in a car or if the phone is powered off. They absolutely do not log when the phone is powered off. However, if you're on a really bumpy track, and your phone's like, bumping up and down, it might log some steps in a car, but it has to be really bumpy for it to do that. Eldridge says she now knows that at 5:45 and 44 seconds on February 13th to 10:32 that night, the phone had wired headphones plugged in. She demonstrates headphones being plugged into an iPhone 6S. It's like one of the old sockets, not the new ones. It's like the little round auxiliary port. That's what the iPhone 6S has. She says it could have been an auxiliary cord for a car that was plugged into the phone. So it doesn't necessarily have to be headphones, but that auxiliary port became active at 5:45 and 44 seconds. And then whatever it was that was put in was taken back out at 10:32. I cannot think of any explanation that does not involve humans, she tells the jury. Eldridge says that right before the headphones were plugged in, there was an incoming call. She says the headphones would have stopped the call. Well, they'd have muted the call. They wouldn't have stopped it. They'd have muted the call. Okay. The state, right, they had a break, and during the break, Chris Cecil, this is ridiculous. Chris Cecil, the state's phone expert, Googled. He Googled. He Googled about headphones and headphone sockets, and said that there could have been water in the auxiliary port, water or dirt in the auxiliary port. So based on his expert analysis, like looking at Google, he was allowed back in rebuttal to testify to what he'd found on Google. What judge would allow an expert to give testimony from something that they just read on Google? Unbelievable. So I did my own Google. And if your phone is water damaged, right? Like Nick McClellan said, well, it could have been water damage because, they'd gone through the creek. So it had got water in it. Well, how come then, the phone stopped moving at 2:32? How come it took it 3 hours to register water damage? And then how come magically water damage disappeared at 10:32? But there is a way to check an iPhone 6S for water damage. Which would have been really easy to do because they had Libby's phone. So this was my expert analysis, checking Google. Look, if it's good enough for Chris Cecil, it's good enough for me. If cleaning the headphone jack didn't help, so this is what happens if your iPhone is stuck in headphone mode. Right. This did happen to me once with that very iPhone 6 that I use for experiments. It did happen to me once. The phone did get stuck in headphone mode, and it was a bit of fluff stuck in the headphone port, in the auxiliary port, and I had to use like a pin or something, like a little needle, and got it out, and then it was fine. So it is possible for the iPhone 6S to get stuck in headphone mode, but it will permanently stay in headphone mode until you do something about it. So if it was dirt, how come dirt magically jumped in at 5:45 and 44 seconds and then jumped back out at 10:32? How? My iPhone 6 would still be in headphone mode to this very day if I hadn't got that piece of fluff out. Anyhow, if cleaning the headphone jack didn't help, you could have a different hardware problem. It's possible that the phone has been damaged by water or other moisture getting inside. If, in that case, the headphone jack is the place the iPhone's water damage indicator appears on many models. For more recent models, it shows in the SIM card slot. For detailed instructions on where the water damage indicator appears on every iPhone model, iPhone support has everything you need. If you see the orange dot indicating water damage, you'll need a repair to get your iPhone out of headphone mode. So if your phone's water damaged and your headphone mode won't turn off, then you'll need to get it repaired. Okay? It's not like water damage will miraculously disappear. It's not like water damage will miraculously appear at 5:45 and 44 seconds and then disappear at 10:32. Water damage is water damage. Okay, so find out if your iPhone or iPod has been exposed to liquid. Like walking through a creek. If liquid damages your iPhone or iPod, for example, coffee or a soft drink or walking through a creek, the servicing for a liquid damage isn't covered by the Apple 1-year warranty. Nothing. Anyway, most iPhone and iPod devices are equipped with liquid contact indicators that you can see from the outside. So they could have checked this. Seemingly, Chris Cecil either didn't see this, because this is from Apple. This is me Googling from Apple, right? So a liquid contact indicator will be activated when it comes into contact with water or a liquid containing water. The indicator's colour is normally white or silver, but when it comes into contact with water or liquid containing water, it will turn fully red. An LCI won't be activated because of humidity and temperature changes that are within the product's environmental requirements. To find out whether the LCI, blah, 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 find your product in the table below. And okay, this is the iPhone 6S, iPhone 6, iPhone 6 Plus, iPhone 6S, iPhone 6S Plus. Where do you find the water damage indicator? Well, it's in the SIM card slot. So all you have to do is remove the little thing that covers your SIM card slot. And if your phone's water damaged, it will have a red indicator. So you look inside. But no, did they do that? No. Why didn't they do that? Because who knows? Because it didn't come up. It didn't come up until Stacey Eldridge said that the iPhone jack activated at 5:45 and 44 seconds and then deactivated, i.e. something was taken out of that port at 10:32. The prosecution were taken completely by surprise, and that's why Chris Cecil had to go and Google it in the break. So nobody bothered to go and check to see whether it did actually have water damage, because no one knew it was going to come up. So again, I think the jury could have been given more information. I think the jury could have been told that, well, you know, if it's water damaged, if you believe that it's water damage, did you check for water damage? Did you check the LCI on the iPhone 6s? Did you check it? But what we absolutely can say is that Ron Logan's confession can't be disproved by the evidence. But we can for Rick Allen's. For Rick Allen's confession, we can refute it by Libby's phone data and by the time of the van. With Ron Logan's confession, the time of the van's irrelevant, and Libby's phone not moving after 2:32 is actually consistent with what Ron Logan said, that he killed he killed Libby and then took Abby with him, and he brought Abby back later. Now, somebody mentioned DNA earlier, so I've got some bits and pieces here from the trial. So these are visuals that someone put on Twitter during the trial. Visual of the DNA found at the crime scene and creek. This one does not include hair, only swabs and findings. So this DNA was confirmed to be unknown male DNA. So we know that there was various hairs found at the crime scene that weren't tested. There was hair wrapped round one of Abby's fingers, which was only tested during the trial, which was confirmed to be Kelsey's, Libby's sister. But there was a bunch of unknown male DNA that they had to have done some testing on it to know that it was unknown male DNA, that it was male DNA. They had to have done some testing, but they can't match it to anybody. Now, I don't know how many attempts they tried to match it, but this is a graphic that I thought was interesting. So Abby purple, Libby blue, unknown male green, and then there was a lab tech DNA that they highlighted. So this is on the bodies. So Abby's purple, Libby's blue, and then unknown male. So Abby's DNA was on Abby's clothes. So that was the t-shirt that Abby was wearing. So that would be blood from her injury, was on her clothes. But then all on the outside of Abby's was Libby's, because Abby was wearing Libby's sweatshirt. So the fact that there was Libby's blood, presumably it's blood, you know, the DNA is from blood, all over this sweatshirt, either means that Libby was wearing it when she had her throat slit, or Abby was wearing it, but she was in close proximity to Libby, because that's all over this sweatshirt. And then we've got unknown male DNA on Libby's chest, the genital area of both girls. There's some unknown male DNA on Abby. And then there's a lab tech, which is just one spot here, which they confirm was the lab tech. This was the stuff found in the creek. So no DNA found on Libby's shirt. These were found in the creek, though. No DNA found on this sweatshirt. And then a little bit of both either Abby or Libby's DNA on them. So this is what Cara Weinecke, who's and she's an appellate lawyer in Indiana, said. This was during the trial. Was the unknown male DNA ever compared to Rick Allen? We assume so. So this unknown male DNA, we assume, was compared with Rick Allen, and it didn't match him. But we'd also assume that it didn't match Ron Logan either. We assume. Now, who did they test? You know, what did they test? How many people did they test it against? Even a small number of alleles can still be compared for exclusion purposes. The same could be done for the girl's male family members. If all those people are excluded, we have a problem. Also, mixture of the girl's DNA shouldn't be an issue with the comparison because they can only use the Y chromosome side of the DNA, removing all of the girl's DNA from the sample, which is absolutely true. So when they do STR testing, when they compare one DNA sample with another, to get an absolute match, like to say this is a match, all the alleles that they test, alleles are just variations of genes, all of those alleles tested have got to match, right? To get a positive match. All of the alleles have got to match. However, you can use, even if you've got a partial sample, you can use a partial sample or a degraded sample to exclude people. But it doesn't appear that they did that. So I did a whole live stream on this. This was like during the trial, but I'll cover this just once more because somebody mentioned it in the chat earlier. So STR DNA testing at crime scenes. So I just got this off the internet because, you know, Google is now acceptable as an expert testimony. DNA is recovered from crime scenes by police CSIs. Nearly every cell in the body contains a complete copy of your DNA. Nearly every cell. Some cells don't. Red blood cells don't have your DNA in them. So there are many ways in which an offender may leave their DNA behind at a crime scene. As we know, could be blood, skin cells, or other bodily fluids. CSIs look in places where the perpetrator of the crime is most likely to have left traces of their DNA behind. So with the girls, they did rape kits. So they're going to look at the genital area. They're going to look at, you know, where, you know, offenders may be sexually motivated to touch. And they did find unknown male DNA, both on and in the girls, sadly. But apparently not consistent with no matches, not consistent with anybody. Items likely to contain traces of DNA are sent to an accredited lab for analysis. If the lab recovers DNA, they will produce a crime profile, which can be loaded to a database for searching. Now, okay. STR stands for short tandem repeats. So each person has like a unique, when they compare various sites, they might compare like 20 different sites in the genome. Everybody's is different. So you have a unique pattern of these short tandem repeats in your DNA profile. But all of the allele sites that are tested to get an absolute match they all have to match. They all have to match. But you only need a small number to exclude somebody. For example, right? All of these people, okay, you know, all of these people that have been tested in the Delphi case and they've not got any matches, well, did they use the DNA for exclusory purposes? That's what Cara Weinecke was getting at. That they may have tested loads of people, including Rick, and not got any matches, maybe because the DNA was only a partial profile or because it was mixed. But you can still use partial profiles or mixed profiles for exclusion purposes. That's what she's getting at. So to convict a suspect, his or her SDR repeats must match those in the crime scene sample. They used to use 13 SDR. They use 20 now. Sometimes they use even more. A single SDR mismatch is enough to exonerate a suspect. So let's say they tested 20 sites. Let's just say they tested 20 sites. They used to test 13. I believe they test 20 now. I'm sure they test 20 in the UK. But anyway, if you only get a match from 19 out of the 20, you cannot say that's a match. It has to be a 20 out of 20. A single mismatch is enough to exonerate a suspect. Because if it's you, if your DNA is at that crime scene, that DNA, to be admissible as this is you, you did this, it has to be a strong match. A single mismatch can be enough to exonerate a suspect. So even with a partial profile, you can still test it for exclusionary purposes. Because let's say, for example, do I have it on here? Yeah. Okay. So let's say, for example, in my partial profile, I can find 10 out of the 20 tested sites, but only 9 of them match my sample. The 9 that match are irrelevant because the one that didn't match exonerates the suspect. So DNA database searches the DNA profile from crimes against the DNA profiles from individuals. So in the US, it's CODIS, the system where DNA samples are stored, from felons and whatever, stored in CODIS. So then you get a suspect DNA from a crime scene and they compare it with all of the samples that are in CODIS. And if they get a match, great. But they can still, again, use partial profiles to exonerate people. Match occurs when the 20 numbers and gender marker representing the individual's DNA are an exact match to the 20 numbers representing the DNA left at the crime scene. So this is UK, National DNA. I don't even know what our acronym is, but this is a UK site. So this is the individual's DNA profile, and this is the crime DNA profile. All right. So you can see that this is a match. All right. So we've got 15, 15, 18, 18, 6, 6, 9, 11, 13, 22, 22, 32, 2, 14, 17, 17, 17, 19, 19, 11. So that's a match. That's spot on. That's spot on. When a match is found, it gives the police a possible suspect for the crime. It's still only a possible suspect because no one could be 100%, 100%. But unless you've got an identical twin, the chances of somebody else having an identical DNA profile to you, it's that minuscule. It's that minuscule. It goes into the, multiple billions of chance that somebody else out there could have the identical genetic profile to you. Unless you're an identical twin or a clone, it ain't going to happen. It ain't going to happen. Sometimes it's not possible to recover a complete DNA profile from the crime scene. For instance, because the offender has tried to remove the evidence, like they've tried to wash it away, or the DNA has been destroyed by environmental conditions, or because it's been mixed with other DNA. In these circumstances, a partial crime profile is obtained and searched against individuals on the DNA database, producing a partial match. So it's still useful, but you can't say it's a match if it's only partial. You can say it's likely, but you can't say it's them. You cannot say it's them. You cannot prove that it's them. What you can do, though, is exclude people. Because let's say you have this partial profile at a crime scene. So you're not able to match this one and this one and this one and this one because it's only partial. But if this number was 16 rather than 15, that exonerates that person. If that number is 5 instead of 6, it exonerates this person. You only need one of these short tandem repeats to be different than your individual that you're testing against, and you can exclude them. It only takes one mismatch to exclude somebody from being the product of that DNA. Now, what Cara Weinicke was saying way back several slides ago was that it is possible to use a partial profile to exonerate an individual. So I would like to have known whether the defense were able to do any DNA testing. Maybe not. Maybe not. Because the defense were working on a very tight budget. And would the defense even have access to the samples is another question. So I hope that answers whatever question it was. That I can't even remember what the question was now, but it was about DNA. That there was loads of DNA at the crime scene, but some of it wasn't tested, like the hairs weren't tested, and the unknown male DNA has never been matched with anybody. So if we go back to this confession, we don't know whether any of the DNA that was found at this crime scene belonged to Ron Logan or any of Ron Logan's animals. There was unknown animal DNA found at the crime scene as well. Animal hair was found at the crime scene. That also comes from the FBI search warrant. One hair did. I just said that was his. The hair that was wrapped round Abby's finger was tested during the trial. They didn't even bother testing it until the defense brought it up at the trial, and then they tested it, and it was Kelsey's. So, but there was other hairs that weren't tested, and there is a lot of DNA at that crime scene that has never been matched with anybody. And any one of those DNA samples could be tested, even if it's partial, to exonerate Rick Allen. And also exonerate Ron Logan as well. We could exonerate them both. What if the actual killer is not Ron Logan and he's not Rick Allen? We know it's not Rick Allen. There's no evidence at all that links Rick Allen. And the theory that the state put forward can be excluded, can be refuted by the state's own evidence. We can't say the same about Ron Logan, though. We can't. Because the van's irrelevant, and Libby's phone data is more likely to indicate them heading to Ron Logan's. and then like maybe starting to go up this hill, and that's where your 20 floors come in, and then them having a fight, Libby getting stabbed, and then he takes Abby away. So, in conclusion, the confession that sunk Rick Allen can be refuted. We can't say the same, though, about Ron Logan's confession. We can't. However, there could be ways, using DNA, to exclude both Rick and Ron Logan. And then if you exclude both of those, Rick Allen goes free. Rick Allen's exonerated. Ron Logan's already dead, so it's irrelevant to him. And then we still have a problem with, well, who did it? Who did it? Now, we do know that a third person did confess. We do know a third person did confess. Elvis Fields confessed. This is from Frank's. This is from the Frank's memo. During our investigation, we learned that on February 14th, 2017, a man named Elvis Fields in Rushville, Indiana, was rambling, hyper, and borderline incoherent. He was talking about having a brother and part of a gang now. This was to his sister. Elvis told his sister, Mary Jacobs, that he'd been on a bridge with two girls that were killed. They didn't even know the girls had been murdered at this point. Elvis told her that someone named Abigail was a troublemaker, so he had to give her horns. She said Elvis tried to give her a blue jacket. After Elvis made these statements to her, she later became aware of the Delphi murders and put two and two together. Sometime 2 to 3 weeks after Elvis made the statements, Mary and her husband, Troy, drove to Delphi. While in Delphi, Mary talked to... cut off, but because I've just copied a paragraph. In October 2017, Elvis moved in with his other sister, Joyce, following the death of her boyfriend. On October 23rd, 2017, Elvis told her the following: I am in a lot of trouble. I'm going away for a long time. I was on that trail and that bridge with the girls that were murdered. There were two other people there with me when it happened. I spit on one of the girls. Then, Elvis was interviewed. Elvis was interviewed on February 27th, 2018. So this is after like a year. A year after the murders, Elvis is finally interviewed. During this interview, Elvis agreed to take a mouth swab that would be used for DNA. So it was Jerry Holman and Kevin Murphy that interviewed him. Holman and Murphy explained the purpose of the mouth swab with Elvis, so Elvis was aware that the DNA from his mouth swab would be compared to any DNA from the crime scene. At the conclusion of the interview, Murphy dropped Elvis off at his trailer. After Elvis exited the police vehicle and walked towards his trailer, Elvis turned around before entering his home and walked back to Murphy's vehicle and said, what would happen if his spit is found on one of the girls? But as an explanation, would he still be in trouble? And yeah, that's the expression I have. That's the expression I have when I think about this case. Now, we've got Elvis's DNA. Same could be said for Elvis. Elvis's DNA could be excluded. They've got Patrick Westfall's DNA. I believe they've got Brad Holder's DNA. They've got a whole bunch of DNA that they might not be able to get a 100% match of, but what they can use that DNA for is exclusionary purposes. So they could be using it to exclude Rick Allen, to exclude Ron Logan, to exclude Elvis Fields, Brad Holder, Patrick Westfall, any male family members whose DNA may have got on the girl's body somehow. Have they got into that, though? Probably not. Because ultimately, the problem with this case is a really, really bad investigation. Whichever way you jump, whether you believe that Rick Allen is the man or not, you have to agree that this investigation has been hampered by mismanagement, by lost evidence, by not following up on evidence, sometimes for years. Will this case ever be solved to, a degree of certainty? I doubt it. I absolutely doubt it, because of the complete mismanagement of it. I think the best we can hope for at this moment in time is a complete exoneration of Rick Allen and using DNA to exclude, as many people as they possibly can. And then whatever remains becomes part of it gets all put in the pot to say, well, we still haven't excluded this person, we still haven't excluded this person or this person. I don't know what else to tell you, honestly. Thank you, Jennifer, for the $1.99. Thank you so much. It's very kind of you. So, yeah. That's all I've got for you, honestly. And my throat's burning now. I didn't mean to talk for this long. So my throat it's like itching and burning at the same time. Yeah, the cops had tunnel vision. I don't know. I don't know what the cops had. Like in 2017, everybody was in the mix, surely. But in 2017, they were just excluding people or not following up on tips. They excluded Brad Holder and Patrick Westfall based on a very small amount of investigation. They just took Patrick Westfall's version of events at face value, and said, oh, he's got an alibi because his son was at home. Well, his son actually said he was at school. So we know that Elvis Fields lied about his alibi, Patrick Westfall lied about his alibi, Ron Logan lied about his alibi. There's probably a whole bunch of other people who also lied about their alibi. We know Richard Allen came forward and his information was never followed up, except for who were those 3 girls that he saw. And then that tip was cleared once they highlighted the girls that they thought that Rick Allen had seen. They excluded him. They put him in the clear box. Unbelievable. So bad. And then losing all of those interviews. Just crazy. So much DNA that's been untested over the years. It's not like they've had, they've had over 8 years. They could have easily tested every single shred of DNA, every single hair, everything. They could have tested it all by now. Like the technology to test things like hairs has come on in leaps and bounds. There may have been hairs that were found at the crime scene that weren't possible to test based on the technology that was available in 2017. But 8 years down the line, the technology to test a DNA from hair is exponentially better now. We've got SNP testing now that can be used on DNA samples. So if there's unidentified DNA, as long as it has to be a full profile, as long as it's a full profile, it can be SNP tested, and then you can do investigative genetic genealogy on it. There's so many more investigative techniques now than there were in 2017. This crime could be solved. This crime could be solved based on the DNA. But everything else, I think, you know, we have to admit that there's probably loads of evidence that's been lost, leads that have been lost, not followed up. So I think the only hope of actually now solving this case is through DNA. But it would involve the powers that be to open their minds and get Rick Allen freed and open their minds and actually wanting to solve the case and following the evidence and going where the evidence takes them. That's the only chance. And that's the only chance to actually solve this case now is through the DNA. And, you know, just starting from scratch with the DNA, starting again and going through it all. So, all right, guys, I'm going to go before my voice goes completely. So thank you all for joining me. And we had Kimberly, who gifted 5 memberships early on. And Jennifer, who's gifted $1.99. We got Daughter of Scotland, who's been a member for 44 months. Insane amount of time. Nearly 4 years. And Paper Chaser, been a member for 30 months. So thank you all. And thanks as always to the mods. Enjoy the rest of your bank holiday if you're in a country that has bank holidays. And I'll see you soon. Bye, guys.